Tonight on Nova, the Dead Sea Scrolls. What secrets do these ancient texts hold? Will they dramatically change religious history for Jews, for Christians? Controversy has shrouded these documents right down to the present day.
That's the fascinating thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can never know what will turn out next.
Will we ever unlock the secrets of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Funding for NOVA is provided by Lockheed, a bold new force in systems engineering, management, and technology services for defense, space, and industry. And Johnson & Johnson, the signature recognized around the world for commitment to quality healthcare products for the entire family. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the financial support of viewers like you.
In the fall of 1946, 3 Bedouin shepherds were moving their herd through the Judean desert along the shore of the Dead Sea. One day, when rounding up a stray, the youngest happened upon some caves near a place called Qumran. He decided to explore, hoping to find buried treasure. One cave was narrow and deep, so he threw a stone and was startled by the sound of pottery breaking. There was no gold inside. But on that day, a shepherd boy had stumbled upon the greatest archaeological discovery of the century, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, the fact is that Israel is the most excavated country in the world. And in spite of that fact, in spite of the fact that this country has been excavated now by scholars for over 120 years, we have very little written material. But here we have a library. We have 800 manuscripts. Here you have a human voice, and a human voice which is easily recognizable.
This was a spectacular find. Religious manuscripts preserved for 2,000 years. Dating from around 250 BC to 70 AD, the scrolls were written mainly in Hebrew and Aramaic on panels of leather or papyrus. Among the scrolls were the oldest biblical texts ever found.
But again, look at the letters, and if you know a little Hebrew, if you have been to a Hebrew school, you can see and you can read. Each and every letter, you can read the same letters.
At the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, several original scrolls are on display. In the center is the longest, the Book of Isaiah. It is 1,000 years older than any other copy we have, and surprisingly readable to the contemporary public. In addition to the biblical texts, the scrolls included a number of strange religious manuscripts never seen before. Scholars are still debating who wrote them and what they reveal about the origins of Christianity and the Judaism we know today. Ever since their discovery, the Dead Sea Scrolls have been embroiled in controversy and political intrigue. This is a saga that is still unfolding. The tribe of Bedouins who discovered the scrolls had roamed the western shore of the Dead Sea for centuries. In 1946, this territory was part of British Palestine. The Bedouins often smuggled goods across the desert to Bethlehem to sell on the black market. But the 7 scrolls discovered by the shepherd boy were not the usual contraband, and for some weeks they were left in a bag hanging on a tent pole. Finally, the scrolls were taken to Bethlehem to sell. It was risky, because excavating antiquities without a license was illegal. The Bedouin heard about an Arab dealer, Kondo, who had a shop on the main street.
Well, the story goes that the first Bedouin that found the scrolls came to Kondo. He understood that the scrolls are made of leather, and he believed that this old leather could be used for straps for his sandals. So Kondo, being a cobbler, was the man to consult with. And he was a part-time antiquities dealer, besides being a cobbler. And he understood immediately that this might bring some money.
Kondo took 4 of the scrolls to the head of his church, St. Mark's Monastery in Jerusalem. Suspecting that the scrolls were written in ancient Syriac, the Archbishop Samuel bought them for $100. But because of the political situation, it was difficult to find scholars to authenticate the manuscripts. These were the last days of British rule in Palestine. Violent confrontations between Jews, Arabs, and British soldiers were frequent. At this time, E.L. Sukenik, an archaeologist in Jerusalem, learned that the other 3 scrolls were for sale in Bethlehem.
Today I met the antiquities dealer. A Hebrew book has been discovered in a jar. He showed me a fragment written on parchment. The script seems very ancient to me. Is it possible?
It was dangerous for the Jewish archaeologist to travel to Arab Bethlehem, but Sukenik decided to go anyway. He bought the 3 scrolls and returned to Jerusalem just in time. The United Nations voted for partition, and the city exploded in violence.
Well, there was some amazing coincidence by the fact that the scrolls were identified as such on the same night that the United Nations decided upon the creation of the State of Israel. That was November 29, 1947. So the meeting of those events is very, very meaningful.
The State of Israel was born. 3 of the 7 Dead Sea Scrolls were secured by Sukenik in time for this momentous occasion. But while there was celebration in the streets, the other 4 scrolls were about to embark on a strange journey. Having confirmed their authenticity, Archbishop Samuel took the 4 scrolls in his possession to America to sell.
At a ceremony in the Library of Congress in Washington, His Grace Mar Samuel, Metropolitan of Jerusalem, unrolls a scroll said to be the oldest known Bible manuscript in the world. A 24-foot document that is virtually the complete book of the prophet Isaiah.
The scrolls caused a sensation. But even after an extensive publicity tour, the Archbishop couldn't find a buyer willing to pay his price, $1 million. Samuel tried to sell the scrolls for 5 years. Finally, he placed an ad in, of all places, the Wall Street Journal. By sheer coincidence, Yigael Yadin, son of the Jewish archaeologist Sukenik, was in America at the time.
I read the ad again and again, but could not believe my eyes. The 4 Dead Sea Scrolls for sale. I inquired through an agent and a bank, and they started a long negotiation. Without Archbishop Samuel knowing who he was negotiating with, we finally agreed that the 4 scrolls would be bought for $250,000. My only regret is that my father did not live to see the scrolls come home to Israel.
Now at last, all 7 scrolls were together, and the shrine of the book was built to house them. One chapter in the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls had come to a close. Jerusalem in the summer of 1990. The news was of strikes, occupied territories, a new conservative government, and the Intifada, the Arab uprising. It was to this city of ancient conflicts that scholars came from all over the world to participate in another drama involving age-old disputes. At the annual Congress on Biblical Archaeology, the session on the Dead Sea Scrolls was a big draw.
Sections of the scroll.
Scholars believe the scrolls may help us understand how Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism emerged out of a tumultuous era.
Which the author-redactor composed himself.
Now, 40 years after their discovery, the scrolls are still the subject of intense interest.
The whole world of Qumran scholars, and there's hundreds of them, are trying to figure out who these people were that created the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're struggling with this. A professor in Kansas has assembled on his computer 10,000 articles that have been written on the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are 400 articles, scholarly articles, in Polish on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mention these simply to give you an example of the concern and interest around the world in scholarship that there is in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
On the other side of the city, in East Jerusalem, is a Center for Dead Sea Scrolls Research, the École Biblique, the French School of Biblical Archaeology. For a part of the year, it has been the home of a scholar who has devoted his entire career to the study of the scrolls. John Strugnell, a professor at the Harvard Divinity School, was working in his small room listening to his favorite piece of music, Carmina Burana.
I came in August 1954. I remember when I came here, my teacher told me, go out there, it's good to get a feel for the country. Maybe you'll stay there 1 year, maybe 2. And 40 years later, here I am. I've lived in this room, I think, for half a year for each of 8 years. It has 1 bed and all the archives of the Qumran project in those boxes.
Later to become a controversial figure, Strugnell was chosen editor-in-chief of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1987 because of his long history with the material. John Strugnell started studying the scrolls almost 40 years ago. As a young scholar, he was invited to Israel as another chapter in this story unfolded. For several years after the discovery, it was thought there were no more scrolls in the Judean desert. But the Bedouins continued to comb the cliffs, and in 1952 they found a second cave containing manuscripts. This galvanized a team of British and French archaeologists to search 275 caves, hoping to uncover other scrolls first, so they wouldn't have to buy them from the Bedouins. In Cave 3, they found a single scroll made of copper, and then abandoned the effort. Within months, the Bedouins hit upon a gold mine, Cave 4. Though archaeologists and Bedouins would find 7 more caves with scroll material, this was the mother lode. John Strugnell was there soon after the discovery.
And in Cave 4, we had fragments of some 700, maybe 800 manuscripts. They're all tiny fragments. We had 800 manuscripts, probably 100 fragments of each. That makes what? 80,000. That's what we had.
The fragments came in slowly, a few pieces at a time, wrapped in toilet paper, cigarette cases, or even shoe boxes. Though the Bedouins had excavated Cave 4 illegally, the Jordanians agreed to purchase the fragments at an official price, $2.80 per square centimeter of inscribed surface. The idea was to keep the material off the black market and in one place, the Palestine Archaeological Museum.
That material was bought over a period of months, indeed, or a period of years from the Bedouin. I had the good fortune of being given all the excavated materials in the summer of 1953 to examine, which I did.
Frank Cross and John Strugnell were part of a small team put together by the Palestine Museum. The museum was under Jordanian control, so no Jewish scholars were included, and this would become an issue in the years to come. All of those on the team were paleographers, experts in the history of writing. The first scrolls discovered in 1946 had been well preserved in earthenware jars. This was not the case with the contents of Cave 4.
There were thousands, hundreds of thousands of fragments, which were about a meter under the soil of a cave, and had been destroyed not only by worms and predators in antiquity, but also by soil moisture, soil acids, and so on.
Some were, you could read them straight away. Some were pitch black. They were all very dry, and in order to read them and unfold them, we had to put them in a cigar humidor, and we put them on a little cotton wool on a saucer inside the humidor, and we sort of took them out every half hour to see if they were ready to be unfolded.
The fragments, as they came from Cave 4, were a mixed jumble. They were like this, so that we arranged over long, long tables in the scrollery hundreds and hundreds of glass plates under which we put fragments. And then we slowly began to assemble fragments that belonged together by script, by the look of the leather, and eventually by the content.
Say we're confronted with 2,000 fragments of varying sizes. We look at the big ones first, and we see, are they a Bible? If they're Bible, we put them into one side. We say, this is the book of Genesis, or Isaiah. But that only takes care of about 15% of the fragments. Then the main work starts, which is handwriting. We study the handwriting carefully, and then we go through all the other fragments and see what is written by the same scribe.
After many years, you get to know your scribes. You know them firsthand. You know what manuscripts they wrote. And we'd find a tiny fragment of the letter to, and we'd shout, here's scribe so-and-so. And off to that plate the fragment would go. So script became increasingly important as the delicacy of our work persisted.
The work of deciphering the fragments found in the early 50s still takes place here at the old Palestine Museum, now called the Rockefeller Museum.
Was it possible that that was put on a Pentateuchal Paraphrases?
No, it's a separate
manuscript.
Stored under lock and key and accessible only to the select team of scholars are the original remains of almost 600 manuscripts. Strugnell agreed to take out some of the precious material.
Why I show you this fragment, it's a nice big fragment. We have hardly any fragments as big as this. It comes from Cave 11. It's a scroll of the Psalms. It's a nice late manuscript, and we have much more of it going right down to the end of the room. This is about the second half of a manuscript of the Book of Numbers. The Book of Numbers is part of the Pentateuch at the beginning of the Hebrew Bible. Here you have the second half of the book. There are about another 6 or so plates. It took us a long time to reconstruct because its text isn't quite the text that we find in the Hebrew Bible. And this is roughly where the fragment stood in the original roll.
Here we are.
Oh, now that's something really important. You can hardly read it because the ink is very often gone, and all you get is the holes that the ink reads. But this is the oldest biblical manuscript in the world. It's the book of Exodus. Professor Cross dates it about 250 BC. It's beautiful in the eye of a paleographer and very important for the study of the biblical text.
Emil Puech is a member of the elite scroll team and is working on one of the previously unknown manuscripts. This document is a photocopy of what is called the Thanksgiving Scroll, which consists of a group of hymns praising the Lord. The scroll scholar has to have the instincts of a detective. While working with some unidentified fragments, Puech was able to make some new connections and construct a whole new part of a manuscript.
And when I look on this, very quickly, I saw that the join is not possible. He said that it's joining here, one fragment. I think no, the join is not good, and the lines are not on the same. I remark that this fragment here join perfectly on this one here. Now, where to put this one? The same color or not? And in looking for this, I had to work with more pieces, and this pieces here is fitting in this place. I try to find more fragments fitting. This small one, 44, is joining here, in this place. And the results are in this way. The first one, and this one. And this is fitting with the next column. And now I have lines, not complete, but it means here an introduction of a part of this scroll, and after that the beginning of one hymn. To do this work, you need concentration, of course, but to put everything of this scroll in your mind, in your memory, and to come back many times, days and nights. And many problems are resolved during the night, when your conscience is inconscient.
Emil Puech inherited his place on the scroll team when his mentor, Father J. Starkey, died in 1988. Starkey bequeathed much of his still unpublished work to the younger man. While this passing on of material has maintained continuity in the work, it also has affected how the scrolls have been interpreted since their discovery. For as long as scholars have been piecing together the scrolls, they have wondered who wrote them. When the manuscripts were found in the caves, archaeologists began to reevaluate some nearby unexcavated ruins, which had been dismissed as a Roman fortress. The Arabs called it Qumran. Perhaps this was where the scrolls were written, 40 miles east of Jerusalem. Even in the 2nd century BC, Jerusalem was a thriving metropolis, the capital of Judea. Centuries of occupation by the Greeks and then the Syrians were brought to an end by a Jewish revolt. For the first time in several hundred years, an independent Jewish state existed. According to ancient historians, this was a turbulent time in Jewish history, when several groups vied for control of the temple and religious authority. One group, the Essenes, was an extremely pious sect of Jews, some of whom went to the desert to escape what they believed was spiritual corruption in Jerusalem. Here, a community of mostly men lived a life of strict discipline.
Whoever has deliberately lied shall do penance for 6 months. Whoever has deliberately insulted his companion unjustly shall do penance for 1 year and shall be excluded. If he has failed...
A number of the scrolls never seen before contained radical religious doctrine, which sounded very much like they were written by the Essenes.
According to all these rules,